everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. We appreciate that you're here. Please let us know where you are located in the chat. We love to see all of our patrons all across the country and even maybe internationally. My name is Daphna Scholl. I am the creative producer for The Braid, as well as your Zoom master for this morning. If you are new, welcome. If you have been to a Sunday morning with The Braid, welcome back. We are so glad that you're here. As always, a few technical housekeeping things to keep in mind. Your audio function is set to mute, and that is just to ensure we're able to hear our moderator and panelists without any accidental interruptions. If you'd like to have closed captioning on your screen, you can hit the CC button all the way at the bottom, and that will pop up text. You can move it around, enlarge it, and place it where you'd like. This event is being recorded, so if you have any friends or family who'd like to watch afterwards, or you'd like to rewatch the event again, you can check out our website in a couple of days, and it will be posted for you to view at your leisure. Let me see if I have one last thing. Yes, we will be having a Q&A at the end of our conversation. If you have any burning questions for Letty, please chat me, and I will be fielding them. And the last 15 minutes we'll be doing the Q&A, so we'll get to as many questions as I can. I appreciate your patience. I believe that is it for me at this time, so I am now going to send it over to our lovely moderator and my friend Arlene Sarner. Hi, Arlene.
Hi, Daphna, and hi, everyone. Thank you, Daphna, for everyone for joining us today. I'm deeply honored to be speaking with celebrated writer, activist, feminist, co-founder of Ms. Magazine, Letty Cottin Pogrebin. I'm Arlene Sarner, and welcome to Sunday with the Braid. After my interview, Daphna will be fielding your questions, and as she mentioned, so feel free to write them in the chat column. Like many of you, I've known about and admired Letty from her extensive and inspiring writer and co-founder and editor of Ms. Magazine. I'd like to share a very short bio and resume of our guest because a full and complete one would take our entire hour. Letty Cottin Pogrebin is an American author, journalist, lecturer, and social activist. She is a founding editor of Ms. Magazine and co-founder of the Ms. Foundation for Women and the National Women's Political Caucus. She is the author of 12 books and dozens of articles and editorials for the New York Times, Washington Post, and many others. In 1976, she was among 13 women who attended the very first feminist Passover Seder. She was featured, among others, in the 2013 documentary film, Makers, Women Who Make America. She was a consulting editor on Free to Be You and Me, Marlo Thomas's groundbreaking children's book, record, and television special. Pogrebin is a life member of Hadassah, and in 2013 was awarded that year's Myrtle Wreath Award. She's a board member of, among other organizations, the Directors Council of the Women in Religion Program at the Harvard Divinity School, the Ms. Foundation for Education and Communication, and the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Program at Brandeis University. Before we get into our discussion, and because we are at heart a theater organization, our wonderful actress, Bari Hochwald Cagnola, will perform a piece based on a true story that our Braid's creative director, Rana Spinak, fashioned from an interview she did with Letty a while ago. Bari, please.
I was a pious little girl, one of the first girls to be bat mitzvah in the conservative movement. I didn't, of course, have a Torah reading. I had a little Oneg Shabbat. I didn't have a party. No fuss was made. It was a one-liner in the Jamaica Jewish Center Bulletin, but I was thrilled. I went on to Hebrew High School and the Yeshiva of Central Queens, and I graduated with honors all the way. My father was president of the shul, a major macher, and he was the head of the men's club and the UJA branch and Jewish war veterans, so he was proud of me. My mother, too. Then when I was 15, my mother died. It was 1955. Our house was full of mourners and friends of my mother's. But when it was time to say Kaddish, there was only 9 Jews. The quorum for public prayer, the making of a minyan, was, in those days, the gathering of 10 men. So my father called the synagogue and asked them to send a 10th man. I tugged at his sleeve and said, I'm educated. I was bat mitzvah, and she's my mother. And my father said, Azar, it's forbidden. So I left Judaism. I did marry a Jew, but he was a lefty and raised without study and without shul. So he left it up to me. I did home-based Judaism with my children, but we didn't affiliate, and I didn't have them bar or bat mitzvah. You could say that I left because of feminism, because I wasn't allowed to count in a minyan. And you could say I came back because of feminism. Suddenly women were being ordained. I could daven, and I could count.
Beautiful, Bari. Thank you so much. And Letty, welcome. And thank you for creating that beautiful piece. I'd like to start with something that's touched on in the beautiful piece we just heard. It seems that incident of not being able to say Kaddish for your mother not only prompted you to reject Judaism for a while, but to look for another faith, which you found in feminism. In your 1992 book, now classic, Deborah Gold and Me, Being Female and Jewish in America, a book I loved, you wrote, quote, I cut off my formal affiliation with Judaism, merged the Jewish patriarch with patriarchal Judaism, and when you leave one, you leave them both, end quote. You struggled for a long time to reconcile your feminism with your Jewish faith. How did you discover you were a feminist? And how did you find your way back to Judaism?
I almost feel I need the permission slip to leave the room and recover from the emotion I've just felt listening to Bari
I think
talk
we
about
all do.
but I mean, I've talked about this a million times in the last 50 years. And people have asked me questions about it, but nobody has brought the lumps to my throat the way you just did. Thank you for the way that you presented the crisis in my life that really did change everything for me vis-a-vis Judaism. And I guess vis-a-vis being a woman. I counted myself out, and as you say, took a very long time to count myself back in. How? Well, there's a scene that I report on in Deborah Golda and Me. My husband and I and our 3 children used to spend summers in Fire Island, which is a little spit of land off the coast of Long Island, which is off the coast of New York. And a group of friends were sitting around on the beach, and we were talking about how it was so beautiful out there and what a shame that we had to go into the city to go to High Holy Day services, which happened in early September that year. It was 1970. And a few of the men said, you know, I think it would be great if we just held services out here on the deck of somebody's house. We could set up an orange crate and make it a bima, and we could, you know, put a nice cloth over it. And we had one store out there in Salt Air, Fire Island, and we could ask the store to provide sponge cake and manischewitz, you know, for our blessings. And we could maybe, you know, get some Machzorim, the High Holy Day prayer books from the synagogue that aren't in great shape anymore. All of our synagogues would probably contribute a couple, and we'll bring in the yarmulkes from what we have in our drawers at home, all of us, from the Schwartz wedding and the, Silverman bar mitzvah. And we'll make a service. We'll do it out here. We'll do Rosh Hashanah out here. And I'm listening to all this. Men are talking. It's on the beach. You can hear from one blanket to another. And I'm listening to all this. And then suddenly one man says, well, I can see all that happening, but who's going to daven? Who's going to do the actual service? And one after another, the men said things like, well, I haven't really looked at a prayer book that way since I was bar mitzvah, or my Hebrew's terrible, or I can't remember a thing. And I spoke up. It was 1970. There were no women rabbis, no women cantors. Women did not have aliyot, the ability to go up to the Torah and say the blessings. But I said, I can do it, because I could, because I was educated to be able to do all that. I just wasn't allowed. That was the problem. And so I owned it. The necessity became the mother of permission, and I was able to stand behind that orange crate. Everything was very pretty and very beautiful, and Jews came out of the woodwork. We didn't even know that there were that many Jews out there in our little community, but we had put up an index card on that one store bulletin board, and we told them whose house was going to be the hosting house and family. And we had about 35 people, as I remember, many of them little children, and everyone came barefoot because that's what we did in Fire Island. And I chanted the Rosh Hashanah service, which I had truncated. I had made it short enough that we could do the whole thing in an hour. So in my conservative synagogue, it was like 4-hour service. I made it an hour because who knew how much people really wanted to sit still for. If they were serious, they would have gone back to the city to their own synagogues. They didn't. So I figured, let's make it user-friendly Judaism. And I chanted it, and I felt as if I had refused my father's gate, refused to honor the gateway my father had set up against me. And my father was a very serious Jew. He was a lawyer, but he was also a Talmud scholar and a Baal Koreh, a person who could read from the Torah, laning perfectly with all the candelations. And he therefore represented Judaism to me. So once I broke through that, I think I was on my way. And it was step by step through the 1970s. I mean, that year, I was asked if I would also chant the Yom Kippur service. And I was, as you said, Bari, as you were acting out me, I was a very pious little girl. And I couldn't imagine myself, I was 30 years old. I couldn't imagine myself chanting Kol Nidre. How could I? I was the girl. So I went walking along the shoreline of the bay out there in Fire Island, and the sun sets over the bay. And I really sort of prayed for a sign, and I got it. I got a purple, pink, yellow, blue, orange, green sunset. And so I did Yom Kippur also. I did Kol Nidre, and that began my search for a pathway back. And thank God, feminism led the way. Feminism was happening all over Judaism. I just didn't know it.
What a fabulous story. So visuals, like a little mini movie you just shared with us, really. So I have to say, as much as I enjoyed your new book, Shonda, A Memoir of Shame and Secrecy, I was equally surprised and even shocked by some of the revelations you shared. You were 12 years old when a cousin revealed previously unknown secrets to you about your family, especially about your mother, who claimed to your sister that she had lived a double life. Many members of your family were complicit in these lies and secrets. The revelations were so shocking to you, you fainted when you heard them. Can you share briefly what caused such a shocking reaction and the long-term effects of that revelation?
Thank you, Arlene, for these really supremely coherent questions. It was at a bar mitzvah. It was after a bar mitzvah of a cousin of mine in Winthrop, Massachusetts. And I now realize suddenly for the very first time that this scene also was on a beach. Wow. This is what happens in therapy, but it doesn't usually happen in a Zoom interview. I did not realize. But This is an aunt and uncle of mine who had a house on the facing the Atlantic Ocean in Winthrop, Massachusetts. And after the bar mitzvah, everybody in my family, I guess there were a couple of dozen, walking back from shul, came to the house. It was cold, spring, maybe late March. And they were all in the kitchen. The adults were having, coffee and bagels and lox and cream cheese and sturgeon and on and on and on. The repast you put on for an at-home celebration post bar mitzvah. And my older cousin, she was 10 years older than I, asked me to play gin rummy because she knew I was an active gin rummy player. It was another thing my father had taught me, besides having taught me by bat mitzvah and everything else. And I was 12 and she was 22. And we sat down and we played gin rummy. And I had her, in one hand, I had gotten 33 points out of her. She was pissed. I could see she wasn't happy. But all of a sudden, it was supposed to be my deal because when you win a hand, you get the cards. And she kept the cards and she started to deal them. And then she threw them at me and she pushed over the table and she said, "You think you're so smart. You think your family is so great. Your mother wasn't even in our family. Your sister isn't really your whole sister. This, and that." She just blurted out in the most incredible revelations and I couldn't absorb them. So I felt myself sliding off my chair and I blacked out and I woke up with my parents sitting on either side, squatting on either side of me. I was on the floor amidst all the cards. And my father said, come, Bubala, we'll go out, we'll walk on the beach, we'll tell you everything. And they did. They told me everything. They had created a complete Potemkin village, a house of cards, whatever metaphor you want to use, a fake family biography. They said they had always said they were married in 1923. My sister was born in 1925. I was born in 1939. We were a normal American Jewish family, and that's how they presented themselves to the world. In fact, they had each been married before to other people. My mother had had a daughter who is the one I called my sister, but was actually my mother's daughter. My father claimed to have adopted her when they married, which was in 1937, not 1923. So I'm walking on the beach beside my parents and realizing that I am the child of liars. And it kind of changed my orientation to life. I lost my ability to trust. And maybe that also contributed to making me a writer and a feminist, because feminists challenge the givens and writers are constantly peeling back the onion. And that's what I've done ever since. And what you mean when you refer to my mother admitting that she had led a double life, that was something I learned when I was writing this memoir, Shonda. And I discovered, thanks to one of my grandchildren, my granddaughter Molly, who was doing a biography of me for her college course. She wanted to, dig deep into the stuff of my life. And so she was in my study one day, and through a lot of delving, she helped me discover a shopping bag full of letters that I had forgotten my sister gave me just before she died. And remember, my sister was 14 years older than I. So when my mother died, she was an adult. I was 15. My mother had left a bag of old documents and letters in a closet. My sister had kept it. And just before she died in 2009, I went up to visit her for the last time. I knew she was dying. She chose to stop eating and eventually stop drinking. So there was a very programmatic scenario, and it was our last visit, and she gave me the letters, and she gave me the bag. I took it back from Massachusetts, where she was, to New York, and I shoved it in a cabinet, and my granddaughter asked me for stuff about my childhood, and that's when I took it out, and that's when I found my mother's deathbed letter to my sister, in which she admitted that she'd been single for 10 years, from 1927 when she was divorced, and my sister was 2 or almost 3. Until she met my father, she had pretended that she was a single woman, not a divorced woman, not a single mother, not a person with a daughter who she had sent to boarding school, the best Jewish boarding school in America, but a single woman. So she had lied about that. She had lied about being a high school graduate when she wasn't. She had lied about never having been married when she had been. She never admitted she was an abused wife. It was all there in the deathbed letter to my sister. So how can you not write a book about all those secrets? I mean, if you made them up, someone might say that's awfully contrived. How can somebody have that many secrets? But it was only the beginning of what I discovered about my own family and its many, many prevarications, deceits, cover-ups, inventions. I admired them in the end because of all the creativity it took to invent themselves, to measure up, to be good Jewish Americans who could be proud of themselves, their children, their families.
I understand. You know, I was so moved by one of those stories about your mother being unhappy that she hadn't graduated from high school and created a photograph of her that looked like she had graduated. It was very moving how difficult lives were and how much people tried. And, you know, you write that growing up, you felt secrets are somehow intrinsically Jewish. You had an epiphany in shul, which led you to believe that secrets and being hidden are an important part of Jewish history and a key to our survival. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I was sitting in shul one Shabbat morning listening to the story of Jacob being fooled by Laban into marrying Leah when he had been promised Rachel. And I was in the middle of writing this memoir, and it was not going to be a memoir about secrets and shame because I hadn't had that realization that my life was so organized by secrets and shame. But suddenly it hit me that, you know, our tradition, our wisdom literature is full of God making people pretend. I mean, it was a plan. It was a plan to switch to Leah, who was an unattractive daughter of Laban, and marry her off. And then Jacob had to work another 7 years to win over Rachel. It was God's plan to have Rebecca make her son Jacob wear the pelts of Esau in order to get the birthright blessing. This is God conniving with humanity to create secrets and masks and pretenses in order to make a certain plan happen. Well, of course, Jews connived and hid. I mean, where would we be if we didn't know how to hide? We hid behind secret cabinets during the Second World War, behind false passports. We hid in forests, excuse me, during the Holocaust. But we hid way back when. We hid under conversion. We converted in order to just survive, to keep our lives in the Inquisition. So our survival mechanisms and our history and our heritage are all about hiddenness. Even in the Midrash, when well, I'm not going to go in. I can see where I can go off on tangents, and I want to hear more of your questions because
Okay.
so,
well, I was very struck by it and started looking at my own family. I think we all have secrets. And I think, you know, just looking at even the movies that are out this year, like Spielberg's Fabelmans, you know, you endured a secret, serious health challenge you fortunately overcame. After writing 11 books, how did that secret prompt you to write Shonda at this point in your life?
I think, you know, I'm 83, so I started this book when I was 78. And I think that when you're facing, you know, you're coming up on 80, if you assess your life, if you're ever going to understand who you are, who you've been, what you have yet to accomplish, what your regrets are really all about, what you can fix and what you can't. That happens when you're facing 80. I wish it on all of you. As they used to say, the alternative is worse. And one of the things that I realized after I had finished the manuscript is that I was hiding my own secret. And if I was going to ever be honest, I could not be obviously a hypocrite and divulge everybody's secrets but my own. I don't choose to do it on this Zoom because it's a very big thing to me, and it's in chapter 1. So if you read the book, you won't have to wait long, and I'll be unmasked. But
I certainly encourage everybody to read this book. A wonderful book.
Thank you. But I went through a process of really deconstructing what I was ashamed of, what are the makings of shame, and how connected they are for me to my Judaism. In the case of this, it was an illness. I was ashamed of it. I kept it a secret. Whereas I had written an entire book about having had breast cancer. And I interviewed everybody about how to be a friend to a friend who's sick. You saw a little quick photo of the jacket of that book, How to Be a Friend to a Friend Who's Sick. But I couldn't talk about this. And the reason was Jewish. And you'll see what I mean. You know, illness was one of the things in my family and most Jewish families I grew up knowing. You didn't talk about it, illness.
That's right.
Cancer was the C word.
It was always the C word. It was nothing more.
And we were ashamed of illness for good reason, which is you couldn't make a shit out if people knew there was bad stuff in your family. So if you were Orthodox or conservative, I don't know that it registered this way on Reform Jews, but maybe it did. Or maybe it is in other cultures and I just don't know it. But certainly in Jewish life, you would say, you know, a lot of cancer in that family. Yeah. You don't want to date so-and-so.
That's for sure, yeah. So you're very well known for being a co-founder and editor of Ms. Magazine. A friend of mine, our mutual friend, attended a discussion you did with Gloria Steinem in New York a few months ago, where you shared a wonderful story of how the two of you met and how that led to Ms. Magazine. Can you share that wonderful story?
Yes, happily. In 1970, my first book was published. It was called How to Make It in a Man's World. It was not a feminist book because I had been what's called a queen bee. I had escaped sexism in my career in publishing throughout the 1960s, which is where I met Marcia Seligson, who's on this phone call, as a dear old friend. And Marcia was a giant in the media, and I was a little person in charge of 4 departments in a book publishing company. And so I wrote a book about that history and the famous authors I worked with, Jacqueline Suzanne and Helen Gurley Brown and President Truman and King Hussein of Jordan and Brendan being a playwright. I had a really fun career in the 1960s, but it wasn't a feminist book. However, I was lucky enough to be reviewed by the New York Times chief book critic, John Leonard, who was a feminist, and he saw feminism in my book and in me. And he wrote a beautiful review, and I got a phone call from Betty Friedan. So that right away is a little off the wall because I knew who she was and I was nobody. I was a baby feminist and she was the author of The Feminine Mystique and this is not Betty. This is my colleagues at Ms. Magazine that you're looking at. Right. At the top, Gloria Steinem, Suzanne Levine, then Joanne Edgar, and the left, Mary Tom, deceased, unfortunately. We loved Mary, that's me, with way too wide shoulders on my jacket, and Pat Carbine, our publisher. But Betty Friedan was the founder of NOW, the National Organization for Women, and the author of The Feminine Mystique, which started it all. I'm talking about 1963 for the book, 1966 for the founding of NOW. And I get a call from her and she wants me to come with her down to Washington, D.C. In July 1971 for the founding of the National Women's Political Caucus. What am I supposed to do there? I'll be her writer. She likes my writing. I'll write up things that she thinks are important that happened at the conference, the workshops, the plenary sessions, the whole works. So I'm down there with Betty, who was a brilliant, however, very difficult woman. And she, imperiously commands me at the end of the first day's events to go into that workshop room over there, and with my little yellow legal pad, because there was no such thing as a computer, and we weren't carrying our electric typewriters with us. And she says, go in there and write up the day's, events, especially the plenary session, which, had a lot of very interesting proposals and amendments and so on. I opened the door to this workshop room. By now it's, end of the night. It's like 10:30, 11 o'clock. And sitting there all by herself is Gloria Steinem. And there are, I don't know if any of you have been at conferences where the workshop rooms have round tables covered in green velvet cloths. And that's where you sit and you have your smaller breakout meetings. She's sitting at one of those tables. It's a freezing cold, overly air-conditioned room because it was July. It was at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington. And I said, oh, excuse me. And I was starting to shut the door. And Gloria said, no, come on in. She said, I'm Gloria Steinem. I said, yes, you are, and I introduced myself, and she said, feel free, take a table. There's a table around there with several unused tables. And I said, well, Betty Friedan actually asked me to write up the events, so I can leave the room. She said, no, I'm writing up the events of the day. Why don't we do it together? And I am like an infant feminist, right? I've just published a book that I didn't even know was feminist. And I've been reading about this new thing called women's lib, but I know nothing. I belong to nothing. I don't go to meetings. I'm nothing. And Gloria Steinem says, come, we'll write it together. And we broke up the assignment. I'll do the session on housewives' rights. Rights. You do the session on lesbian rights. I'll do the session on, we split up the assignment and we worked together until 3 or 4 in the morning. And we ended up wrapped in those green felt tablecloths together because it was so cold. So I told that at the Stryker Center here in New York. And it was my first memory of Gloria, but not my first introduction to her, because I had read everything she had written. So I was in awe of her to begin with. And then suddenly she asked me, would I be interested in working with her and a few other women to found a new magazine. We didn't have a name for it then, but we did. On Monday, we hit New York, back to New York, and we started meeting. And the rest is now a 50-year history of Ms.
It certainly is history. I bought that first issue, and I could tell you that the things you were writing about really shook me to my core. And it led to my friends and I to form our first women's group and proudly identify ourselves as feminists. Can you talk about the reaction to the magazine and where the magazine is now?
Yes, well, I'll start backwards, I guess. The magazine is now published by the Feminist Majority Foundation in LA, near you guys. Most of you guys, I guess, are in California. So I haven't been with it for years. I think I left, the magazine left us in 1989 or thereabouts. So it's a long, long time. But we've had events over the years that have, brought us all together. So we've certainly the original Mizzers, what we call ourselves, the original Mizzers, and the Ms. kids who came to the Ms. magazine tot lot, which we had one entire room dedicated to children, because we recognized that childcare arrangements fall through and that anyone who was working at the magazine might have to bring in a child. And so I used to do an annual review of toys, new toys, and I would rate them by whether they were non-sexist, non-racist, multicultural, and the packaging was, not all boys or all girls, and not pink or all blue. And I would rate them and I would try them. I would open the toy and see if it was safe, see if it worked, see if it had what it said it had and did what it said it was going to do. And then, of course, if you keep, when the toy manufacturer sends you a sample, you keep it. And it went into the tot lot. So we had the best equipped, it was like a nursery school classroom or beyond. And it just always represented to me, and the current issue is out of Ms. right now, the 50th anniversary issue, in which I reminisce about that we were always often called an anti-child movement, anti-family movement, anti-male movement, but only Ms. had a room specially for kids, recognized the needs of working parents, and we had a couple of men who worked for us as well. So if they had a parental crisis, their kid came in. We had, Alice Walker's child, Rebecca, was in the class, and my 3 children, who, when the magazine was founded, I was the only editor with young children, but Alice wasn't there at that point. She came way later. But my kids in 1972 were 7, 7, and 4 years old. I have twin women and 1 man, and they were 7, 7, and 4 years old. So eventually Robin Morgan joined the staff, and her child Blake was there. And at our recent anniversary celebration here at the Ford Foundation in New York, they gave us a beautiful space to celebrate in. There was Robin Morgan's son, completely bald, and my son, 6 foot tall. I mean, they all remembered each other when they were this tall.
Yeah.
And it was a family. So the irony is that the critics of feminism used a completely bogus opposition to us based on the fact that we were anti-family. We were the only ones who were accommodating to family reality. So I need to put that on record.
So I remember that. I remember that backlash. And, and it seems now there's a backlash with younger, very modern women. A lot of young women I know don't want to be called feminists. Why do you think that is? What's different now? And what's the legacy of your early feminism?
I think that happened a while ago, where you would hear people say, I'm not a feminist, but, and then they would recite every single thing that feminism is working for.
Right.
They were afraid of the label, because the label was excoriated, demonized, stigmatized. So who would want it? But I don't care about labels. I care about activism and commitment and focus. And the women were doing the work. So that was a period of time. Now everybody's a feminist. I mean, Beyonce is a feminist, right? You can be a feminist because virtually every profile in Vanity Fair or in People magazine says so-and-so is a staunch feminist. And men are feminists. They're quick to say they're feminists. Not always plausible, but they say it. So I don't think we should get sidetracked by the label. I think what we should look at is the fact that feminism is so integrated into everyday life that it's like a fish doesn't know it's in water. There's all that discussion about cancel culture, which somehow or other also is now being blamed on feminism. But women are fighting back, and young women are so marvelously inclusive about the issues. We were very hell-bent on legislative change. We were hell-bent, my generation, what you would call second wave feminism. First wave was the suffragists, Susan B. Anthony, etc. Second wave was us. We're aging out now, and whoever's left. Third wave was, blow it all out and, show your puppet, show your belly button, wear short skirts. It was wrongly called lipstick feminism, but that was sort of symbolic of the fact that they were attacking the idea that you had to be dull and dreary looking and matronly and hairy legs and all that. They were reacting against that and saying, we can show our breasts and be feminists. We can wear lipstick and be feminists and so on. And now fourth wave is everybody else. And it's kind of thoroughly inclusive. It simply wants to see a world in which women are fully human, period, the end.
Right. Well, leads me to one of my favorite things you created. In 1976, you were part of the very first feminist Seder. I remember hearing about it and thinking it was a revolutionary act. It's an idea so many of my friends and I have embraced and copied over the years, using some of the many Haggadahs that created for those. Can you talk about how that came together, how that happened?
Oh, I love that you're raising that, Arlene, because we are coming up this spring on our 47th annual Seder, which is pretty amazing.
There it
And
is.
there have been, and I'm glad that you've had, there it is, yeah. I'm there laying down on the right of Esther Broner, who's wearing her high priestess gown and holding a Kiddush cup. And let's see and Martha Ackelsberg is on the right. And I don't know who's immediately on Esther's left. I forgot her name, but Edith somebody or other, an artist, is on the left. She's passed also. But this was being held in Esther's loft, and we did it, and we all sat on the floor or on piles of pillows, except for Bella Abzug, who came to our seders but couldn't squat. So we always had a chair for Bella. And after she died, we had a chair with a hat on it. Do you happen to have a picture of Bella? Anyway, if not, Bella was the congresswoman, the big, strapping, strong-willed
Sure,
congresswoman.
remember
Always
her.
wore a hat, and she was a good, staunch Jewish feminist, and she always stormed the floor of the Congress with great progressive legislation. And we honor her every year by just having the chair with a hat on it. The reason it started with a small group on the Upper West Side. That doesn't everything Jewish start there? With Phyllis Chesler, Esther Broner. I don't know if these names mean anything. I'm even forgetting them. I'm 83, and this is the kind of stuff I cannot easily retrieve. But there's a book called The Telling that will tell you the whole story of the feminist Seder. The important thing is, Esther was a visionary. She was a ritualist. Esther made everything meaningful. The smallest thing, you entered the room, you carried a hyssop branch, you touched the lintels, you said a blessing, you scattered petals on the floor, you sat at the Seder table, you recited the 10 plagues of women, you recited the 4 questions of women. You made meaningful what was owned by men with women in the kitchen making chicken soup. We did all of the blessings. We did traditional, but with a feminist twist. And we've been at it for years. And since Esther passed away, I would have to look up when, but it's many years now. Her daughter, Nahama, and granddaughter, Alexandra, run the Seder. So we have our own nice lineage. And everywhere I go, there are people who say, we do a women's Seder.
Yeah.
And we didn't do our Seder to replace the Seders that we did in our family. We added it. We did it on the 3rd night, or we did it on the last night of the 8-day period. So it was additive. And that's what's so wonderful about feminist rituals. You don't have to sweep away the old. You simply add, you fill in blanks. You bring the voices of women to a table where they were silent.
Beautiful. I'm so, of all the things you've written, I'm so grateful for that feminist Seder. The very idea of it is
Thanks.
wonderful.
Yeah, and we have Miriam's cup right next to Elijah's. Which I
There you go.
hope all of you do. I certainly hope all of you do.
So I have 2 more quick questions, and then I'm going to go back to Daphne with Q&A. So Shonda is your 12th book. What do you hope people will take away from it?
The desire to live a secret-free life. Because since I got it all on the page, I feel like I've lost, 30, 50 pounds. I just feel light. I feel that wasn't so bad. You know that feeling? I got that out, and that wasn't so bad. And now I don't have to lie, and I don't have to try to remember who did I tell this to, and who did I tell that to, and who didn't I, and what secrets. I wouldn't ever tell anyone else's secrets. Let me be clear. But most of the things that I felt were keeping secret about myself were burdensome. They were burdensome, and now they're gone.
That must be a good feeling.
And I think after you read the book that you'll go through in your head the parallels in your own families, and then you'll realize, gee whiz, what are we keeping that secret for? So-and-so is gay. Who cares? We've been keeping. We had in my family 2 bachelor uncles. Bachelor uncles was the word for gay in my family. nobody ever confronted the truth about it. And meanwhile, these guys had to hide. I have a whole chapter about my nephew, how he came out to me because he was afraid to tell his parents. My sister, who was 14 years older and sort of a different generation. So I hope that's what they experience. And sooner rather than later. Don't wait till you're in your 70s or 80s. Get rid of them. They're corrosive.
Good advice. So one more question before Daphne takes them for our audience. What's next for you? More travel, more speaking, more books, we hope?
Thank you. Well, I'm doing a newsletter, and anybody who wants to can just look it up. Just go to LettyCottinPogrebin.com, and there's a subscribe to my newsletter button. And in it, I write about women, Jews, Israel, Palestine, American politics, and they're all very short items. They're just things that obsess me that for the moment, and it's a very quick read, but it alerts you to things you might not have read in the mainstream press or even in the Jewish press or the local press or whatever.
Well, I'm glad you're still obsessing.
Yeah.
So it was just fascinating, Letty. I want to thank you so much for sharing your remarkable life and career. I love your new book, Shonda, and I really encourage everybody to get a copy. And I have to say, true to her ideals, Letty would prefer when you purchase the book, you do so from bookshop.org, which connects you with independent bookstores who need our help more than Jeff Bezos. So there's a link to it in the chat bubble. And now here's Daphne to take your questions.
Thank you, Arlene. And thank you, Letty. That was a really wonderful conversation. I received many questions. I just want to say thank you to everyone who chatted me. I will get to as many as I can.
Thank you, Daphne, for making, Daphne's the one who made my pillow straight and made my life good.
You are very welcome. It's a team effort over here at the Braid. So the first question I have for you is, someone was curious how your Judaism impacted your work at Ms. from the beginning and throughout the years that you worked at the magazine.
Interesting question. In the very beginning, when I was in rebellion against Judaism and had counted myself out, the only thing I ever did that was Jewish was in my house. I made sure my children had Shabbat and Jewish holidays. I did not belong. You know how Jews say I belong? I did not belong to any Jewish organization or any synagogue. I bought a ticket to an overflow service, went by myself, not with my family. My husband was a lefty, raised a Marxist, atheist, activist, progressive kind of Jew, red diaper baby. So there was no Judaism in my life when I was at Ms., except when anything Jewish came up, I was the Jew that was the go-to Jew. And soon, when I started doing the services in Salt Air Fire Island and getting into Jewish feminism, I said to my fellow sister editors, let's do a piece on Jewish feminism. And we got Paula Hyman, who was a professor of Jewish history at Yale, whom I had met because she came to a feminist Seder. And I asked her to write the piece, and I worked with her on it. And then, of course, I got completely sucked into Jewish feminism, meaning, I started doing tashlich with women, which is where we throw our sins into moving waters. And I just, started paying more attention to the liturgy and God language. And although I've never worn a pink yarmulke or talit or any, because I'm still associating those objects, holy as they are, I associate them with men because I was raised for so long. They have like an XY chromosome on them for me. But I got so involved, and after we published that, we got lots of stories from Jewish women about Judaism, about the patriarchy of Judaism, and we really started paying attention to Israel and Palestine, etc. And in 1981, I wrote a very long piece on anti-Semitism in the women's movement, because I was pretty shocked to discover that there was anti-Semitism in the women's movement, especially after the beginning of the UN conferences on the Decade of Women, when there were really look, I'm very critical of Israeli governments, but I don't demonize Israel, and the kind of reaction to Israel at the UN conferences that really were unacceptable. You don't want to make a sisterhood of women and then have some of them hate you as a Jew. So it became very important to me to distinguish between the actions of a particular Israeli government and Israel as a Jewish state.
Thank you. That was a really wonderful answer, and relevant still to this day, and probably will be very far into the future. So another question we received: was there ever a subject that was too controversial to publish an article about?
Yes. My sister editors and I almost came to blows over publishing a memoir by a woman who was a masochist. I mean, we had a lot of discussions about pornography, and there were really two positions that one could take on pornography. And it was reasonable to describe them both in the pages of the magazine, because there were lots of feminists on both sides, the sort of First Amendment absolutists and the ones like Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon, who were really critical of pornography, period, and really delved into the imagery and all of that. But on the issue of this one woman who wrote a story, true story, we knew it was true because she was for a little while one of our editors. And she wrote a piece about how she was treated by this man during the sadomasochistic relationship. And I said, I'm leaving. That's how seriously I took it. I will not be able to work here if we publish this, because too many women are being abused. And I don't want them to be able to have to look at this magazine and think that's okay because this Ms. Editor tolerated it, liked it, loved it, happened to be somebody who at some point, pain and pleasure got cross wires in her. I didn't want a woman who was being abused against her will to think there was something wrong with her because she didn't enjoy it.
And to follow up on that, what was the relationships like within the group of you in order to come to some sort of consensus about the decisions that were made?
It was really quite miraculous because we found out that leaderless groups, which is the feminist ideal in the early 70s, to have a leaderless group, everybody's equal, everyone can do everything. We found out that doesn't work, that there were people who could proofread and other people who never noticed, if a period was missing or a capital letter was missing. There were people who could do this and not do that. And so some degree of specialization took place. We did not have a masthead with hierarchical titles, however. And the best thing to me in all my memories of my 18 years there, when we started the magazine till we sold it to Feminist Majority Foundation, is the editorial meetings. They were Tuesday mornings, and they were the best thing in my life because we talked about everything, we hashed over everything. It was like a consciousness raising group, except with an agenda, with an organized agenda. Who people brought the manuscripts that they were editing or proposals that they'd received, and we talked about them. We talked about the balance of the issue. We talked about the cover lines. I remember when we decided to put Shirley Chisholm on the cover, and we knew that we had a long talk about it because we knew we were going to lose all the newsstands in the South. They would not put a magazine with a Black woman on the cover. We said, frig it. We're going to have Shirley Chisholm on the cover. And we didn't, there were no unilateral decisions at Ms. I mean, people think Gloria decided and everybody else did their thing. Gloria was the least. We had to get Gloria to be a little authoritative. She hated being authoritative, just the way she invited me to write with her in the freezing cold room in the Shoreham Hotel. Gloria always wants to share the credit. She's the one who modeled the sharing of the credit, but she did all the work, same as everyone. That's what is so wonderful about her. What you see about Gloria is who she is.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. And another question we have, what do you see the future of the feminist? This is a very big question, but how do you see the future of the feminist movement progressing? I know you and Arlene kind of spoke about it a little bit, but you know, with Harvey Weinstein, with the Me Too movement,
Well, I think
starting.
the Me Too movement proved there couldn't have been a Me Too movement without a feminist movement, because women learned that they had a voice over time. Unfortunately, I think it took us a little too long to learn we had a voice when it came to sexual assault and misconduct and rape, etc. But the price you paid for being for the complaint, for the outing of an offender, was so great. And the climate changed because we forced through anti-sexual harassment laws, which I remember when there were none. I remember when no one knew the term. It was, Gloria says, it was just called life, sexual harassment. There wasn't a woman who hadn't experienced it. So I think that by the time Me Too came around, it was a piece of the women's movement. The women's movement is movements of women and others who view women as full human beings to correct wrongs. That's the women's movement now. And it takes its shape based on any given issue. It can be a meat boycott because of the high price of meat, which women were organized around at a certain point. And it was feminism in action, because women were mostly feeding their families, not men, still the case. And they were the ones who knew the price of meat. You remember when George Bush didn't know the price of a quart of milk. So women know the prices of things. And so they're the ones who organize boycotts. Women are the ones who are at the crossroads in a neighborhood where there's no traffic light. And it becomes a feminist act when they become not volunteers who stand at the corner, but activists who storm the legislature, the city council, and say, we need a light at that corner. That's feminist. That's feminism. As far as myself, I am doing so much traveling for this book, traveling and speaking and doing Zooms like this, which I enjoy immensely. I love the questions. Really, Arlene, your questions are just a treat for me. Thank you.
Oh.
And I think I'm going to be doing that again. If you go to my website, you'll see where I'm going to be speaking. And I think I have something like 30 already scheduled, 30 talks already scheduled for 2023. So that'll probably take me through 2023. If I live so long, and that's something everyone in my family said, if I live so long, I hope I can write another book, and maybe it'll be a novel, but I can't really say, because really at this age, it's chutzpah to think that you can make plans. You know, we plan and God laughs.
Well, Letty, thank you so much. This has been an incredible morning, afternoon. Some people it might be the middle of the night. I'm not quite sure. I know we had someone from Israel, so, and other places. So this is just such a lovely treat.
I hope you can send me the chat.
Yes, absolutely. You know what? I'm going to ask Susan to save the chat, and we'll send it to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate all of you being there. It's fun to look at your faces. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. So I want to thank Letty. I want to thank Arlene. And I have a few quick announcements about the braid, and then I'm going to send it over to Rhonda Spinek, our artistic director. So if everyone just hangs in there for another 5 minutes, we'd really appreciate it. For those of you who are braid patrons, or this is your first time, we have our first salon show of the season called Remembrance of Things Present, which is a show about second and third generation Holocaust survivors, the descendants of Holocaust survivors, and their incredible stories. And we hope that you will attend a show in January. The tickets are being posted in the chat by Susan. And if you'd like to also subscribe to our season, we have 3 shows. We have this show. We have a show called Out Loud, which is stories of the queer LGBTQ plus Jewish community. And we also have a show called What a Surprise, which is stories of surprises, both positive, negative, and everything in between. So we really hope that you will join us for our season. We'd love to greet you, whether it be in person or on Zoom. We also have Zoom shows for anyone who is not in Los Angeles. So now first of all, I also just want to say say a quick thank you to Susan Morgenstern, who is behind the scenes, who is running the TAC and co-produces this event with me. So thank you, Susan. And and to Bari. Bari, thank you so much. There's so many people to thank. Thank you, Bari. And now I'm gonna send it over to Rhonda Spinek, our artistic director. Hi, Rhonda.
Hey, Daphna. Wow. I don't know about all of you, but I am still verklempt from Barry's opening piece, and also Letty, just your honesty and just your heart. I mean, I just feel like you just shared with us something so special today at this event. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Bari, amazing. Arlene, you are the master. Daphna, incredible. And Susan Morgenstern is behind the scenes today, but she also directed Bari in that short piece. Please, everyone, you must come and see Remembrance of Things Present. We are currently in rehearsal. It is an incredible show. Do not stay away because you're afraid you're going to cry. Yes, you will cry, but you will learn and you will be inspired by these incredible stories, the sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters of survivors. And Letty will send you a ticket. You got to come and see this. Anyway, please join us. And
Airline ticket.
well, you know what? We're actually going to be performing this show at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in April, in person, if you want to wait that long.
Okay.
So you can come and see it in person in New York. I will send you that ticket. Anyway, thank you all for joining today. And thank you too for those of you who made a donation or who bought a virtual ticket. We love offering all these events complimentary so that everybody can join. And for those of you who can afford to pay a little bit, we are grateful. And that's it. I will see you again. And Letty, again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Really grateful.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day or evening. See you next time.